Welcome to Galactic Atlas Lore. If you enjoy these tales, please like and subscribe. If you have any recommendations you would like me to explore, please leave a comment. Let's begin. Sabacc Secrets, Tale of an Imperial Spy. Chapter 1. The Last Hand. Alan Rowe never trusted clean hands. In his experience, they belonged to card sharks or corpse pullers, and he wasn't particularly fond of either. He stared at his own hands now, scarred, steady, and stained with a dozen systems worth of sins. The dim light of the holoscreen in his hold flickered softly, illuminating a face that hadn't smiled in days. The message was on repeat. Priority 1 directive, Imperial Intel, eyes only. He hadn't answered it. Not yet. He sipped from a flask of Corallian black-burned spice liquor, illegal in 3 sectors, and stared out the porthole of his ship, the Vainglory, as it drifted above the dusty rings of Javarin's Folly, a forgotten moon orbiting a gas giant too radioactive to name. Out here, in the deep slices, only ghosts roamed, which made it perfect for ex-smugglers who'd sold their soul to the Empire for a handful of credits and a clean record. Kalen Rowe was one such ghost. He used to run spice and sabacc chips between huts and dignitaries back before the fall of the Republic. He flew under half a dozen names, made deals with both Jedi and Separatists, and never picked a side until the sides picked each other off. When the Empire rose, Kalen chose survival. A few meetings with ISB handlers, a few betrayals, and suddenly he wasn't a smuggler anymore. He was an asset. Spy, informant, tool. The titles didn't matter. The pay wasn't worth the guilt. Still, guilt was a luxury. Survival was currency. The message finally played again. A familiar face blinked to life. ISB Commander Rel Varin. Pale, sharp-eyed, and immaculately groomed, Varin looked like he'd never seen the sun, let alone war. Kalen, I know you're listening. We've intercepted intelligence suggesting a rebel cell operating out of Cantonica. Not just any cell. This one's running offs through Canto Bite's upper floor. That casino tower isn't just lights and lords. It's a front. They've stolen something. High-level encryption codes tied to the Fondor shipyards. We believe they're auctioning them. To whom, we don't know, but we need someone who can get inside, blend, gamble, smile, lie. Kalen exhaled slowly. He'd known the peace wouldn't last. Varin continued, You're not on the official roster. That's why this works. You'll be given a temporary alias, standard funds, no backup. You recover the codes and extract. Quietly. No collateral, no witnesses. The mission is yours. Or it's no one's. The screen went dark. Canto Bite. Of course. The Jewel of Cantonica. A city built not on power or faith or rebellion, but on wealth. On excess. On elegance and corruption polished so clean it almost sparkled. Where Twi'lek dancers spun above marble halls, and huts wagered fortunes over a glass of sun-melted ice wine. Where deals were made with a smile, and betrayals unfolded behind gold-plated doors. And behind it all, the casinos, the lifeblood of the planet's economy, and the camouflage for 100 crimes the Empire never saw coming. He'd been there before. 10 years ago, under a different name and face. The Golden Nova Casino, crown jewel of the skyline, watched over the city like a god of vice. 500 floors, surveillance networks deeper than the HoloNet. And somewhere inside, hidden behind layers of servers, cocktails, and smoke, were codes that could cripple the Empire's shipyard output for years. And Kalen Rowe had to find them. He stood up from the pilot's seat and cracked his neck. His reflection caught in the mirror. Salt and cinder hair, crowlines under the eyes, a half-shaven jaw hiding a scar from the Battle of Scarif. That one hadn't been his fight. But Intel has a funny way of dragging people in. He activated the ship's navigation. Vainglory hummed like an old drunk clearing its throat. Destination, Cantonica. Passenger, Roe, Kalen, alias Corbin Vale. Clearance, Diplomatic Observance, Level 3. Kalen smirked. Guess I'm back in the game. Cantonica was a contradiction. A desert world dressed in silk. Its surface was barren rock and coarse soil, but Cantobight rose like an oasis, powered by imports and indulgence. The domed skyline glittered even from orbit, a kaleidoscope of light and color. Automated shuttles buzzed through narrow lanes, air speeders glided past towers carved from mirror metal, and crowds flowed through marble plazas like currents of silk and synth fabric. When Kalen docked at the upper-tier spaceport, customs barely glanced at him. The wealthy were above suspicion. That was the genius of Cantonica. The crime was dressed in etiquette, and money turned every eye elsewhere. He checked into the Crimson Atlas Hotel 4 blocks from the Golden Nova. His suite overlooked the sea, artificial of course, and was stocked with fine Corellian brandy, designer robes, and a balcony that caught the sunset like a lover's hand. He ignored it all. Instead, he studied the hotel's access points, the layout of nearby towers, and the data spike he'd been issued. The codes were being moved soon. He had 3 days, maybe less. He visited the Nova that evening. A glass dome crowned the casino, its entrance guarded by droids dressed like concierges. Inside it was a living mural of wealth, floating tables, alien musicians, fountains that whispered fortunes. Twi'lek dealers dealt sabacc hands with hypnotic rhythm, and every guest wore masks, literal or otherwise. Nobility from Zygeria, tech lords from Hosnian Prime, smugglers pretending to be diplomats, diplomats pretending to be smugglers. And somewhere in that crowd was Valessa. He spotted her before she saw him. She was older now, maybe by 5 years, but her posture hadn't changed, back straight, chin tilted just enough to say, "I see you," without acknowledging anything else. Her leku coiled elegantly over one shoulder, painted with crimson and black tribal swirls. She wore a backless dress cut like a blade, and her smile, when it formed, was fire and frost all at once. Their eyes met. He nodded. She turned away without a word. Perfect. He returned to the hotel with a knot in his gut. Valessa wasn't just a rival player. She'd once been his partner. In cards, in crimes, and briefly, in things messier than either. If she was here, she was playing for someone. Maybe the rebels. Maybe herself. He'd find out. Soon. Kalen leaned on the balcony, watching the city flicker with artificial dusk. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a game. And he had just been dealt in. Chapter 2. The City of Lights and Lies. Cantobight never slept. It shimmered instead, with a pulse that mimicked the galaxy's best illusions of paradise, the kind of place built not for truth but for appearance. Every corner turned by Kalon Rowe revealed another mask, the smiling face of a noble hiding weapons under his cape, a beggar whispering codes to a slicer across the plaza, or a droid programmed to serve drinks and pick pockets in equal measure. But beneath the layer of civility and perfume, Cantobight reeked of danger. It had the sharp, perfumed smell of opulence and blood, of old credits stacked high and morality sold cheap. Kalen strolled along a main promenade just past sunset, when the artificial sea reflected the towers in oil-slicked color and the neon began to paint every glass wall in vibrating hues. The casinos lit up in patterns that mimicked star lines, an optical illusion meant to impress visiting diplomats and empty their pockets. Star-shaped chandeliers hovered overhead, and every window reflected 100 distorted versions of himself. He passed by gamblers in floor-length silks, bounty hunters in civilian clothes, and Imperial sympathizers whispering into comlinks behind fans. This world was both everyone's and no one's, and Caleb belonged exactly where he shouldn't, in the center of the lie. The Golden Nova Casino stood like a cathedral to indulgence. Its spires were shaped like daggers plunged skyward, and every square meter of its polished floors had been waxed with ambition. In its atrium, a living sculpture of dancing light twirled in a spiral of transparent liquid, and patrons applauded like it was art, not expensive distraction. Caleb entered with the confidence of someone who knew how to disappear in plain sight. The name he used, Corbin Vale, had once belonged to a smuggler who'd vanished near Corellia. He wore it now like a cloak, wrapped around a sleek black jacket tailored to look expensive but simple. A tiny synth patch on his collar shimmered with a false diplomatic code that passed every scan. He walked past security checkpoints with a nod and a polite grin, flashing forged credentials and a chip that identified him as a trade observer from the core worlds. Inside the main hall, Sabacc tables spun slowly on repulsor lifts. Each one hosted a different game variant: Classic Sabacc, Corellian Shift, Outer Rim Draw, and the outlawed Mandalorian Smash format. Caleb passed through rows of droids calculating odds and bartenders pouring off-world liquor into crystalline glasses worth more than his ship. A tall Faline man in indigo robes greeted him near the high roller section with a curious look and a subtle scan of his belt line. Caleb let the sweep pass. He wasn't carrying weapons, not tonight. His weapon was his name, his face, and the misdirection he could weave between the two. "Welcome, Mr. Vale," the Faline said smoothly, offering a metallic token. "Your entry to the Black Room is confirmed for tomorrow night. Until then, enjoy the outer floor. Should you need credit, our concierge will link to your bond." Caleb accepted the token, flipping it once in his hand. It shimmered with the sigil of a mythosaur skull. An affectation? A joke, maybe? Or a symbol? He slipped it into his pocket. Then he saw her again. Valessa. No disguise, no hiding. She was at a table surrounded by politicians from Chandrilla and gamblers from Taris, her posture like that of a queen among soldiers. Her Sabacc cards hovered mid-air, suspended by the magnetic tension of the table's core. Her eyes met his again for a second. No recognition, no fear, just cold calculation and the faintest lift of one brow. She knew he was watching. She let him. A moment later she folded her hand and stood, leaving the table with graceful indifference, as if she hadn't just fleeced the entire group. Caleb followed her to the private lounge 2 floors above. The lounge was quieter. Here the music was low and smoky, like a whisper you couldn't quite catch. Patrons were thinner but wealthier. He found her near the glass wall overlooking the city, sipping a translucent cocktail with glowing flecks of firefruit pulp suspended inside. "Valessa," he said without pretending to be surprised. She didn't turn. "Corbin Vale," she replied, voice dry as aged riscate. "Or are we playing different games tonight?" He joined her at the railing, his reflection catching in the glass beside hers. "I didn't expect you to be here." She tilted her glass. "Of course not. You never do. Yet here we are. Again." Her eyes, purple with a cybernetic flicker, scanned him, reading him like she used to read Sabacc tells. "If you're here," she added, "someone sent you." "Empire?" He didn't answer. She laughed softly. "That transparent. Either you're getting sloppy or I'm getting better." Caleb kept his tone neutral. "I'm just here for a game." "Aren't we all?" she said. "But this time, the stakes are higher than chips." Her glass clicked against the balcony rail. "You're looking for the codes, aren't you?" She didn't wait for confirmation. "Everyone is. The entire upper city's trying to pretend it's not real, but the auction's tomorrow. Buyers from across the galaxy. Huts, Black Sun. Even a Jedi or two, depending on which rumors you believe. You're not going to win this with charm and a deck." Caleb leaned forward slightly, voice low. "So help me. You've already got a hand in the game. You always do. Valessa turned to him fully now. You're assuming I'm not selling them. That stopped him. She held the silence for a moment, then smiled. Relax. I'm not. But I am watching closely. Whoever ends up with those codes won't just hit shipyards. They'll crash half the sector's trade routes. This isn't a heist. It's a declaration. She walked past him, brushing his arm as she left. You should fold, Kalen. The house always wins. He watched her disappear into the haze of light and shadow. The codes were here. The auction was real, and he was already a few moves behind. That meant it was time to stop playing cards and start planning the cheat. Chapter 3. Masks and Motives. The next morning came in a wash of golden light filtered through the tinted viewport of Kalen's suite. Even in the high tower of the Crimson Atlas, the sunrise over Canto Bight had a theatrical quality to it. Engineered to look just chaotic enough to be real, casting fractured beams through the sleek high-rises and bouncing across the glinting facade of the Golden Nova. Somewhere below, droids were sweeping the walkways of spilled wine and crushed flower petals from the night before, erasing the memory of every lie sold under chandelier light. Kalen stood shirtless at the window, cup of bitter caf in hand, replaying the conversation with Valessa. If she was telling the truth, and that was always a dangerous assumption, the codes weren't just blackmail currency, but keys to sabotage on a scale that could unravel whole sectors of the Empire's military infrastructure. That kind of information wasn't just valuable, it was volatile. The auction would be held in the Nova's Black Room, a space so exclusive it didn't appear on schematics or digital maps. It was invitation only, shielded from even the casino's security systems, and only operable during sanctioned high-level gatherings. The ISB had briefed him with partial intel, how the codes had been lifted from an Imperial substation on Fondor, how the leak led to a shipment of access data making its way into underground networks, and how all signs pointed to one of the rebel-linked networks on Cantonica being the broker. No one knew who actually possessed the codes now. That's where Kalen came in. A smuggler's charm, a liar's instincts, and a spy's patience. His job wasn't to buy the codes or negotiate their retrieval, it was to steal them. By mid-morning he was back in the Nova's Grand Hall, dressed now in a dark forest green vest lined with microfiber armor plating, a saber pin clipped to his collar to imply some vague diplomatic service. The tournament qualifiers had begun, a 3-day series of escalating Sabacc games that culminated in the final table held inside the Black Room. Getting into that room meant winning at least 3 rounds, or bribing the right person with the right favors. Kalen preferred cards. They didn't lie to him. People did. He approached the entry desk, where a gleaming protocol droid welcomed him with a voice modulated to sound like a Coruscanti aristocrat. Mr. Corben Vale, welcome back. You are registered for Heat Table 5, Corellian Sabacc variant. Please proceed to Lounge 3. Wagers begin at 10,000 credits. Kalen nodded once, slipping into the crowd of players. Most were seasoned gamblers, some with polished fingernails and dead eyes, others laughing too loud to hide their nerves. A few were professionals with hidden comlinks and vibroblades tucked in boots, likely representing one syndicate or another. He took his seat at table 5, nodding at the other players with a smile that said, "I'm dangerous enough to beat you, charming enough to let you enjoy it." The game was fast. Corellian Sabacc played like a knife fight in slow motion, calculated, aggressive, and full of probability manipulation. But Kalen didn't play numbers, he played people. The Rhodian to his left shifted every time she had a strong hand. The Deveronian across from him stroked the side of his neck when he bluffed. The human noble beside them wore augmented lenses, illegal but subtle. Kalen caught her adjusting the focus on his cards in round 3 and leaned back in his chair. "Ma'am," he said cheerfully, "if you're going to cheat, at least buy me a drink first." The table laughed. She flushed red, withdrew from the game, and moments later a casino supervisor approached with apologies and a complimentary drink token. Kalen took it, though he had no interest in the beverage. By the end of the heat, he'd won a modest pile and earned a slot in the secondary round that evening. The tournament structure ensured that each finalist would pass through various security layers and surveillance points, perfect cover for someone sneaking in a data spike or decryptor tool. He needed access to the Nova's back systems, and more than that, he needed a reason to be seen in places he shouldn't be. A high-stakes tournament gave him that permission. Later that afternoon, he met with a contact someone from ISB's local asset pool, a slicer named Brex, disguised as a maintenance technician. They met in a service corridor behind one of the casino's numerous water features. Brex was short, shaven-headed and twitchy, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too many code walls and not enough daylight. "Your spike's coded for temporary authentication," Brex whispered, handing over a palm-sized chip with a glowing filament. "It'll only run for 4 minutes once inserted. Any longer and Nova's security firewall flags it. You'll have to time it during a system reboot or environmental control sweep." Kalen pocketed the device. "You got a map of the security network?" "A partial one. The full layout's still offline. They use live-coded topography, maps that shift dynamically to prevent pre-planning." Brex pulled up a schematic on a projector screen. "Your best bet is the climate-controlled duct in Lounge 4G. You can plug in during a scheduled filter clean, but you'll only get one shot. That window closes 30 seconds after the reboot." Kalen nodded. "Then I'll have to win fast." Brex stared at him. "You sure you can do this alone?" "I'm not alone," Kalen replied with a wry smile. "I've got a deck of cards and a grudge." That night, the Nova glowed hotter than usual. Lantern drones drifted above the tournament floor, casting warm hues over the players, and the entire upper level buzzed with anticipation. Celebrities, crime lords, and diplomats gathered in lounge booths, sipping jeweled cocktails and placing side bets. Kalen entered the floor like he owned it, accepting nods, shoulder pats, and lingering stares. He sat at his assigned table, palms dry, mind sharp. His thoughts didn't drift to the Empire. They didn't drift to the rebellion. They drifted, briefly, to Valessa. She watched him from across the room, not smiling, not frowning, simply observing like a hawk over a canyon, waiting to see what climbed out of the darkness and whether it could fly. He drew his first hand, fingers sliding across the cards with the ease of a man who knew the stakes weren't just chips, they were war. And he had no intention of folding. Chapter 4. Double Blind. The Nova's central tower rose like a spire of deception into the artificial dusk, its upper floors restricted to the sort of guests who never asked for prices and always travelled with someone else's secrets sewn into the seams of their coats. Floor 89, Lounge 4G, wasn't a lounge in the traditional sense. It was a temporary luxury enclosure constructed for the mid-tier qualifiers, just glamorous enough to seem exclusive, but still far beneath the glittering sanctity of the Black Room. And that made it perfect. Kalen Rowe sat at the bar, nursing a drink he hadn't touched, eyes tracking the subtle hum of the environmental systems through the polished carbon glass ceiling above him. The schedule Brex had given him was tight. At precisely 21:30 local time, the atmospheric filtration would reset for maintenance, a 42-second reboot window that temporarily disabled the network firewall between auxiliary venting and the Nova's internal systems. That would be his moment. The lounge was crowded enough to give him cover, but not so packed as to restrict movement. The key was not to sneak. Sneaking drew attention. But confidence, casualness, that was its own kind of stealth. He moved from his table just before the quarter hour, adjusting his cufflink as if checking the time, and walked along the outer corridor where the holo art displays rotated between vistas of Chandrila, Ithor, and Vulture's ice reefs. At the far end, past a velvet rope and a service-only door barely visible in the glimmer of the wall lights, he found the panel he needed. There were no guards, just cameras. Cameras he knew were now cycling through a visual scrub during a system-wide recalibration. He slid the access card Brex had given him across the seam in the wall, and with a faint hiss the panel loosened. Inside it was darker, cooler. pipes and cables winding like the arteries of some artificial beast. Kalen ducked low, crawling toward the central hub node, where a narrow socket blinked faint green. He reached into his coat, withdrew the spike and inserted it into the port. A soft hum responded, and tiny filaments uncoiled from the chip, crawling into the terminal like silver vines. A display bloomed in his retinal implant, code streams, directory trees, system prompts. Breck's encryption bypass kicked in, and the display lit up red, then shifted green. He was in, but not for long. Kalen navigated the database instinctively, bypassing guest registries and security logs until he reached the encrypted transaction chain. A list of internal financial adjustments, coded bets, bribes, room charges, event logs, all dating to the previous 5 cycles. Then he saw it. A flagged transaction under an unregistered profile, traced to the Black Room. A 4.3 million credit buy-in transferred from a shadow account tied to the Fondor drive. The signature ping matched Imperial-grade code. That was it. And the location key embedded in the payment receipt revealed that the codes were scheduled to be delivered mid-tournament to a storage vault in the Nova's sub-level data vaults, secured behind biometric scan and ID lock encryption. Then something changed. The code stream stuttered. His implant flashed orange, incoming alert. Someone was accessing the same stream, remotely. Kalen cursed under his breath, pulling the spike free just as the feed began to overload. A soft hiss of vented gas filled the duct, and a warning tone chirped from the ceiling. "Time's up!" He crawled back into the hallway just as a trio of servers passed, trays of jeweled drinks glittering in the light. One paused to glance at him, and Kalen flashed a lazy grin. "Wrong room," he muttered. "Too many Chandralan fizz pops. You know how it is." The server didn't reply, but kept walking. The moment passed. Back in the lounge, Valessa was waiting for him. She stood beside the Sabacc table where he'd left his drink, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the chair, the other holding a translucent data crystal. She held it up between 2 fingers like it was something fragile and deadly. "You tapped the system," she said quietly. "Not an accusation, just an observation. And you weren't the only one." Kalen sat down slowly, adjusting his collar. "You followed me?" "I followed the spike signature. Not many slicers still use filament creep in this city. It's old tech, no one trusts it." "I trust what I understand," Kalen said. "And I don't trust city slicers." Valessa set the crystal down. "They moved the codes." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, voice soft, "someone triggered a trace during your access. Standard countermeasure protocol, vault contents rerouted. The delivery is now off-site." "Where?" She leaned in. "The off-grid docking silo beneath the casino, level 9. You need retinal clearance, facial imprint, and a black map access card issued by the board director." He sighed. "So impossible." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's why you'll need help," he raised a brow. "And you're offering?" "I'm offering a partnership. Temporary. Mutual benefit. You want to recover the codes. I want to make sure they don't end up in the wrong hands." "And which hands are the wrong ones?" "The ones waving Imperial flags." He stared at her for a moment, the memory of old jobs and whispered deals dancing behind his eyes. He trusted her once. That trust had cost him time in a Zygerian cell. But she was right about one thing. He couldn't do this alone. Not now, not with the window shrinking and the Nova's eyes tightening around him. He reached for the crystal and slipped it into his pocket. "All right. Temporary." Her smile widened slightly. "Good. You'll need a tuxedo." "Why?" "Because we're going to the gala tomorrow night, and the director's going to hand you that black badge personally." He blinked. "You're serious?" "As a blaster bolt. And we're going to steal it right off his neck." Chapter 5. Empire at the Table. The Nova's gala was unlike anything Callan had ever seen, and he had once attended a Twi'lek coronation on Ryloth that ended in a bar fight and 3 diplomatic incidents. But this was pure Cantonica. Elegance drenched in performance, where extravagance was mistaken for taste, and everyone smiled because they were all too rich or too armed to frown. The atrium had been transformed overnight into a crystalline garden, with floating orbs of starlight drifting between trellises of imported orchids from Naboo. Champagne flowed from fountains carved into the shape of chandelier water serpents. Music rose from an invisible quartet of droids humming in perfect pitch, and beneath it all was the low hum of tension wrapped in perfume. Kalen Rowe stood at the edge of the ballroom in a tailored black tux with grey lapel accents, formal wear cut to let him move if things turned kinetic. Valessa had insisted on the look, even selecting the cufflinks herself, obsidian flecks mounted in polished durasteel, each inscribed with a runic symbol from some forgotten sector. She said they were lucky. He doubted that. He hadn't had luck since the day he started working for the Empire. She hadn't joined him yet. She'd vanished after delivering the plan promising to handle distractions. That worried him more than her presence. Valessa didn't believe in subtlety when she didn't have to. The man they were targeting, Director Halvan Tai, was a banking oligarch from Koru Lug turned casino overlord by way of Imperial connections and backroom pacts. He ran the Nova's higher operations and was the only confirmed link to the relocation of the encryption codes. If he carried the access badge, and ISB believed he did, then getting it from him without triggering alarm would take more than smooth talk. It would take a distraction big enough to blot out his entire world for 20 seconds. Kalen made his way through the crowd, offering half smiles and brief nods, absorbing details with every glance. The Nova's upper clientele came from all systems. Togruta in diplomatic sashes, Neimoidian investors eyeing each other like prey, and Mandalorian aristocrats with helms tucked under their arms and steel smiles on their lips. The Empire's shadow loomed here, but in tailored suits and disguised interests. You didn't see stormtroopers at Canto Bight galas. You saw barons, envoys, and asset managers with the weight of military might hidden behind champagne flutes. But tonight, something was off. At 22:14 local time, as Kalen reached the central fountain atrium, he saw them. 3 men in black uniforms, too sharp for fashion and too dull for security. ISB, real ones, not assets, full officers. He froze for a moment, shifting his face just slightly, lowering his chin. They didn't see him, or at least, they didn't register him as a target, not yet, but their presence was a wrench thrown straight into the gears of his carefully constructed cover. Imperial Security Bureau didn't show up to gamble. They showed up to close doors. And bodies. He scanned the room again and saw Tai. The director stood beside the auctioneer's dais near a trio of red silk banners that bore no sigil, just patterns of movement from the Nova's own design language, abstract elegance for the elite. Tai was tall, heavy, and meticulously dressed in a velvet vest with gold filigree, and there it was, clipped just inside his breast lapel, partially visible when he turned to toast a guest. An obsidian triangle embedded with a pulsing core, the black badge badge. He made his approach as the auction opened, with subtle announcements broadcast through private earpieces. Each guest of level 7 or above would receive their encryption key, tied to identity-locked signatures. The real trade, Kalen knew, wasn't for what was on display, it was for what was hidden beneath it. The codes weren't physical. They were stored in an off-site vault, accessible only by someone who held a verified key to the transfer server, the black badge. He slipped beside Tai near the bar, watching as the man laughed a little too loudly at a story being told by a dignitary from Kuat. Kalen smiled smoothly, leaned in and said, "Director Tai, I have to thank you. This event is unlike anything I've ever experienced." Tai turned slightly, scanning him. Kalen extended the gloved hand. "Corbin Vale, Trade Attaché. I work closely with the Zeltros Export Commission." Tai shook his hand with a grip too firm. "Ah, yes, Zeltros. Your people throw the best disasters, always with smiles." He chuckled at his own joke and turned back to his glass. Kalen leaned in again, lowering his voice. I wonder if I could speak with you privately just for a moment. I have a small logistical issue with my entry credential. My client would be furious if I missed the final transfer. Tai didn't look impressed. That's a problem for security, which is why I came to you directly. I'd prefer not to involve anyone else. Tai narrowed his eyes slightly. You have 30 seconds. And then it happened. A sound like thunder cracked through the dome above, and every light in the atrium stuttered. A scream followed, a high, theatrical shriek that came from the eastern mezzanine. Guests turned. The music cut out. Smoke rose from a service vent, thick and sudden, and alarms began to whisper in response. Security droids appeared, scanning wildly. It was Valessa's work. Kalen didn't hesitate. He stepped into Tai's personal space, whispering, "Your badge, Director. It's compromised." "What?" Kalen reached under Tai's arm, tapped a pressure point, and disabled the ID clip's magnetic lock. It fell into his palm with barely a flick. "Security wants it now," he said, eyes locked on Tai's confused face. "I'll return it after verification." Tai blinked, processing too much at once. Then the lights returned, the music resumed, and the smoke began to clear. Kalen was already gone. He slipped through the crowd, pulse quickening, ears tuned to every shift in tone. No shouts, no footsteps, no alarm. He reached the private lift shaft embedded near the east wall, inserted the badge, and waited. The door opened, the elevator descended, and Kalon Rowe smiled for the first time in days. One step closer. Chapter 6. The house always watches. The lift dropped in silence, air humming with restrained power as polished black durasteel panels glided past the transparent shaft. Unlike the upper levels of the Golden Nova, which bloomed with neon, color, and spectacle, the lower levels, subterranean tiers hidden beneath the surface of Canto Bight, were designed with sterility in mind. No luxury, no art, no seduction, just clean angles, reinforced lighting, and the hum of security, too advanced to be bought or bribed. The casino's underbelly wasn't meant to impress, it was meant to intimidate. When the doors opened on level 9, Kalen stepped into silence. The hallway stretched ahead in clinical white, no guards in sight, no music, no voices, only the quiet thrum of machines. He walked slowly, his footsteps muffled by sound-dampened floors. At the end of the corridor stood a pair of vault doors, hexagonal and thick enough to survive a proton charge. On either side, retina scanners glowed like half-lidded eyes, and above them hovered an identity confirmation camera mounted into the ceiling, tracking every movement with an AI's patience. He reached the checkpoint and paused, fishing the stolen black Majmad from his jacket. One scan, one blink of light, and the machine responded with a chirp of access. The vault doors split with hydraulic precision, revealing a chamber not much larger than a shipping crate, but its contents were worth more than most planetary economies. Rows of data pylons lined the walls, each connected to a central node that pulsed with encoded information. The air was dry, faintly ionized. Kalen approached the primary console, withdrawing a small egg-shaped decryptor device issued by ISB. Its surface shimmered as he activated it, tiny needles unfolding and plugging into the console with a soft hiss. The readout began to scroll across his retinal display, line after line of military encryption, access logs and storage markers. Then came the key, the Fondor codes, not just standard supply algorithms. These were deep system overrides, capable of disrupting command frequencies and fleet mobilization patterns across the midrim. A tool of war, disguised as a series of digits. He began the transfer. 4 minutes. And in that moment, everything changed. The door behind him didn't hiss or clank. It simply opened, and Valessa walked in. She wasn't alone. 2 security droids flanked her, their optics glowing amber, but they made no move. They weren't Imperial. They were Nova's personal network, beholden to the casino, not the Empire or the Rebellion. Velessa, for her part, looked calm, measured, elegant even in the pale light. She said nothing as she stepped into the room, watching the decryptor work its silent magic. Kalen didn't flinch. "I'm guessing you set the smoke trap to trigger a secondary flag." She tilted her head slightly. "Clever boy. I needed access to this room as much as you did. Then why the guards? To prove a point?" The droids didn't move. "You think you're the only one who can run a long game?" she asked, walking closer. "I knew the codes were real weeks ago. I followed the data trail, traced the ISB inquiries, and watched them land in your lap. I didn't step in because I needed you to get me through that door." "And now?" he asked, one brow raised. "Now," she said, "I need to know who you're giving them to." The air shifted. The tension coiled between them like a magnetic tether. He turned back to the terminal. "That's not your concern." She stepped closer. "It is if you're about to tip the war." "I'm tipping the odds. That's what I've always done." "Cullen, listen to me. Those codes, they don't just shut down shipyards. They reroute security back doors to planetary defense grids. Whole cities could go dark, or worse." "I know." "Then why?" "Because if I don't, someone else will. Someone worse." Her voice lowered just above a whisper. "The empire you work for doesn't believe in restraint. If they get full control of these routes, they'll lock the sector tighter than a Hutt's vault. You think this is about preserving balance? You're choosing oppression over chaos." Kalen turned to face her, his voice calm but edged. "I'm choosing to survive, like always." The droid shifted slightly at her signal, not hostile but alert. She raised a hand to still them. "You survived long enough to become what we hated. You walked away. I stayed in. Someone had to. And you think that makes you noble?" "No," he said, unplugging the decryptor with one swift pull. "It makes me dangerous." He turned and walked past her. For a moment, she didn't follow. Then, softly, "They'll kill you, you know." He didn't look back. "Maybe, but not tonight." Back on the Vainglory, parked beneath a remote hangar dock on the city's edge, Kalen uploaded the code package to his secure channel. The message pinged the ISB relay node in the Malastair subgrid, encrypted with his asset's ID. Then he sat in silence, watching the stars from the pilot's seat as the ship's engines idled low, like a heartbeat. He didn't trust what he'd done. He didn't trust Velessa. He barely trusted himself. But the game wasn't over, and he still had cards left to play. Chapter 7. Queen of Blades. The Vainglory drifted in low orbit above Cantonica, tethered by falsified beacon clearance, shielded by silence. Kalen sat in the pilot's chair, eyes distant as the codes he'd stolen pulsed in a secure data core locked behind 6 layers of scrambling encryption. The message had gone through. ISB would receive it, and with it the Empire would own yet another lever of power over the mid-rim. A fleet could disappear. The blockade could shift overnight. It wasn't his place to wonder how they'd use it. That was the deal. Look away and live. But something clung to him, just under the skin, like the residue of a lie told too well. He couldn't stop seeing Velessa's face in that vault. Measured, still, but not angry, just tired. Like she'd played too many hands and wasn't sure if any of them mattered anymore. He rose from his seat and made his way through the ship's narrow corridor, low light painting long shadows across worn plating. On the bulkhead beside his bunk, a faded photograph was still magnet-pinned. He and Velessa, smiling, younger, backs to the sunrise on a rooftop somewhere in Hutt space. He should have removed it years ago. He almost did again. Instead, he checked the ship's internal scanner. A proximity alert blinked softly. "Unauthorized vessel detected. Mid-atmosphere, low signature, no transponder," he sighed. Of course. The ship docked 20 minutes later without ceremony. Kalen watched from the airlock as the figure stepped through, Tall, cloaked, face masked in matte chrome. Not Velessa, someone else. She didn't send messages. She sent shadows. The visitor spoke in the kind of voice that had no accent, no age, just purpose. Asset 74 Delta, you have completed Phase 2. Kalen didn't answer. The figure continued. The codes are being analyzed. Their utility exceeds projections. Your status remains provisional. You people really know how to say thank you. We don't deal in gratitude. He gestured toward the figure's belt, where a small black cylinder pulsed with heat. Not a weapon, a recorder. So what now? The figure stepped closer. Now you return to sleep. Maintain cover. Await activation. I thought this was activation. The figure tilted its head. The game has more than one table. Then it turned and left. No name given, no signal received. Just gone. That was the Empire. Efficient, inevitable, and utterly devoid of the things Kalen once believed made the galaxy worth gambling on. Later that evening, as he walked alone along the neon-lined platforms of Canto Bite's lower tiers, Kalen felt the old instincts return. The need to vanish, the itch to move, the pull of freedom that no Imperial contract could ever kill completely. But the city down here was different. Rougher, less polish, more survival. Twi'lek vendors haggled beside spice runners. Kids chased wind-blown chips between discarded cred stubs. This was the Cantonica the tourists never saw. Raw and honest in a way no Gala could replicate. He turned down an alley to clear his head, and stopped. Velessa was waiting. She wore a different dress now, darker, combat-stitched at the seams, one vibro dagger sheathed at her hip. Her lecous were coiled tight, eyes glowing faint violet under the broken streetlight. "You should have given them to someone else," she said without preamble. Kalen crossed his arms. Wouldn't have mattered. It always matters. He leaned against the Duracrete wall, watching her. "You came to kill me?" She raised a brow. "If I wanted you dead, you'd be dust. I came for something else." He waited. She stepped closer. "I want you to listen, not as an agent, not as an asset, as the man I knew. You remember her? That girl who stood with you in Mozeka when you bluffed that hut out of his own moon yacht?" Kalen smiled faintly. "You poured fizz-pop on his robes." "I liked her," she said. "She was stupid and fearless." He looked away. "She was doomed." Velessa's tone cooled. "You think playing both sides makes you clever, but you're just becoming the shadow they use to erase the galaxy. And you think helping the rebellion makes you free? It makes me real." They stood in silence. Then she said, "I'll be there when it falls." "When what falls?" "The Empire, your handlers. This whole lie you think buys you safety." He watched her go, her silhouette vanishing into the hum of the street, part of the world he used to run with, now a ghost, chasing something more noble than he ever dared to. Back in his ship, the codes lay secure. Outside, the galaxy kept spinning, and in the shadows between stars, the dealer shuffled a new hand. Chapter 8. The Nova Gambit. The black room pulsed with anticipation. High above the standard gambling floors, sealed off from the noise and glitter, it existed outside normal time, timeless and deliberate, like the center of a dying star where gravity bent rules. Here, the richest games in the galaxy were played not with cards, but with secrets. It was the following night, and Kalen stood once again at the threshold of power, dressed in black, on black formal wear, the ISB microtransponder woven into the lining of his collar, dormant for now. The Nova's guards had scanned him twice on entry, not for weapons, but for tells. "You didn't bring blasters to this level. You brought leverage." A hovering Sabacc table awaited in the center of the room, its surface like a storm about to break, dim, magnetically charged, and shifting subtly with every player's breath. Around it were 6 seats, each already filled by faces of note. A Zigerian baroness who trafficked in spice lanes, a Diros with half his face replaced by gold plating, a human syndicate agent from the Tapani sector wearing a blood-red cloak, and Velessa, seated cool and statuesque in a slanted-back chair, her eyes unreadable behind a veil of half-smirk and knowing gaze. Kalen took the final seat. The dealer droid, an elegant chrome humanoid with a Corellian vocal patch, activated the table with a flick of its slender wrist. Gentle beings, welcome to the final round of the Nova Invitational. As per tradition, your wagers are sealed. The prize, discretion, control, and fortune. Let the game begin. The cards spun, the chips clinked, but this wasn't about cards. Not tonight. The codes were already gone, transferred to ISB under classified channels, encrypted and scrambled, with only Kalen's signature as proof. But the room didn't know that. The players still believed the prize sat within the Nova's inner vaults, and that tonight's victor would leave with keys to a kingdom of espionage and control. It was the perfect cover. As the game unfolded, Kalen played deliberately, never winning too much, never folding too fast. He needed to stay invisible and vital. Velessa, meanwhile, played with precision so sharp it could draw blood. She baited, smiled, folded, won. The Baroness scowled. The Duros cursed in clipped binary, and through it all, the table burned with tension. They weren't just gambling for credits. They were testing each other, reading motives behind bluffs, alliances behind smirks. That was what Sabacc was at this level. Politics with a pulse. Midway through the third hand, the Duros leaned toward Kalen, voice low. "You're not who you say you are. Too clean, too quiet." Kalen met his gaze without blinking. "Neither are you." The Duros smiled, jagged teeth, all implants. "Maybe we'll find out who dies lying first." The room chuckled, but behind the table's glow, Velessa made her move. While the players bluffed, she activated a concealed slicer embedded in her bracelet, feeding false transaction data into the Nova's security feed. The guards outside would see nothing. The vault would remain sealed. The entire game, every bluff and every play, was a stage, just long enough for her program to corrupt the last backup registry of the codes, erasing all trace they had ever passed through the Nova. Kalen watched her do it, reading the twitch of her hand, the angle of her shoulder, and knew. She wasn't here to steal, she was here to clean up. For him. When the final hand ended and the Baroness took the pot, the players clapped lightly and the dealer deactivated the table. "An excellent game," the droid intoned. "All winnings are being processed now. Security will escort you to your suites." Kalen stood. Velessa was already moving toward the exit. He caught her in the hallway, just past the sensor gate that scanned for post-tournament disputes. "You covered me," he said. She didn't stop walking. "I finished what you couldn't," he kept pace. "Why? Because if anyone knew you'd already taken the codes, the Empire would burn this place to ash." He grabbed her arm. "And you care what happens to the Nova?" She turned, fierce and low-voiced. "I care what happens to people." "The rebellion can't afford a crackdown here. You gave them a weapon. I made sure no one saw who loaded it." He let go. She stepped back, gaze softening just enough. "You did what you had to. So did I." They parted again, not with anger, but something more fragile, an understanding shaped like regret. That night, Kalen flew out under forged credentials, the vainglory slicing through atmosphere like a ghost no one could chase. He didn't check messages, didn't scan the Navi computer, just flew until the stars stretched long and the sky forgot his name. Somewhere, in an encrypted archive on Coruscant, a new report was filed. Mission complete, asset status dormant, awaiting orders. Chapter 9. The Exit Gamble. The vainglory drifted into the shadow of a half-lit moon, its engines cooled to silence, its transponder ping hidden behind half a dozen forged identities. Calen Rowe had spent the last 6 hours watching hyperspace lanes like a gambler watching loaded dice. He wasn't running, not exactly, but he wasn't reporting in either. The job was done. The codes were delivered. The Empire's leash had slackened just enough for him to take a breath, and in that breath uncertainty had settled like dust on old cards. He sat in the cockpit, tunic half unbuttoned, the holocom projector before him flashing with an unread message stamped in ISB's grey insignia. Priority Alpha. He hadn't played it yet. Didn't need to hear the words to know what they would say. He had two choices: return to Coruscant, debrief, accept whatever came next, which was probably another mission, another face, another false name, or vanish, slice the ship's signature clean, disappear beyond the rim and live like he used to, scraping creds, gambling for fuel, avoiding attention until the Empire forgot his name. His hand hovered over the projector. Then he killed the feed. Instead, he stood and moved to the weapons locker. From the bottom drawer he pulled a small, smooth case. Not for blasters, for cards. Sabacc deck, Lotol issue, pre-Empire, the kind with edges worn by real hands, not programmed chance. He shuffled them slowly, letting the motion calm him. Then the proximity alert pinged. A ship had entered his sensor field. Fast, silent, no registration. Before he could react, a hail came through. Direct channel, no encryption. He frowned and accepted it. The hollow projector flickered. Velessa. She sat cross-legged in a Spartan chair aboard a ship he didn't recognize, Leku loose around her shoulders, face unreadable. "You left in a hurry," she said. "I had a deadline. You always do." He sat, leaned back, watched her through layers of static and silence. She said, "They'll come for you eventually. You know that." "They always do. I wiped the trail," she continued. "No one knows where the codes went. Not even the rebels. All they know is the Empire didn't get what they expected." Kalen raised a brow. "Didn't they?" "I saw the transmission log," she said. "But I also saw the transfer didn't finish." He froze. "The court corrupted midway through. Maybe interference. Maybe sabotage." He leaned forward, heart racing. "You saying they didn't get the full package?" She nodded. "Half the codes made it. The other half were scrambled beyond recovery. Looks like someone set a decay loop in the data shell." Kalen stood, walked the cabin. "That wasn't me." She smiled faintly. Then someone else wanted to make sure no one had full control. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he said, "So what happens now?" She shrugged. "The Empire thinks it won, the rebels think they lost. The truth is, nobody has the full deck." He looked back at the cards in his hand. "Then maybe we all get to play another round." She studied him. "You're not done, Kalen. You were never just an informant. You're a wild card. That makes you dangerous. Or expendable. Only if you stop bluffing." She ended the call. The silence returned. Kalen sat there, holding the Queen of Staves in his fingers, burnished edges worn soft from years of use. Not the winning card, but one you could build a hand around. A card that could tip the game if played right. He activated the navicomputer. Set a course. Somewhere quiet, somewhere free. And as the stars stretched long around him, he smiled. For the first time in a long time, the next move was his. Chapter 10. The Last Bluff. The desert world of Ord Vaxel was a graveyard of wars nobody remembered. Scars still marred its surface, craters from orbital bombardments, shattered Duracrete bunkers overtaken by thorned vines, and rusted-out walkers sunken into salt flats like prehistoric bones. The locals lived underground now, in tunnel networks beneath the sand, bartering food, tech, and stories for heat and drink. No one asked questions on Ord Vaxel. That was its currency, anonymity. Kalen Rowe's ship landed in the shadow of a ruined Imperial comms relay, long abandoned, its dish snapped clean by time and weather. He disembarked alone, no weapons visible, a cloak wrapped tight around him to block the wind. He'd left Canto Bight, the Nova, and the Empire behind, at least for now. Out here, he wasn't Agent 7 for Delta. He wasn't Corbin Vale or Captain Jerrick Thorne or any of the half-dozen names he'd used over the years. He was just a man trying to outrun the parts of himself that hadn't been scrubbed clean by duty. The bar was a pit, half buried, roof held up by scrap beams, filled with smoke that smelled of rust and low-grade coolant. A Bith played something mournful on a bent instrument near the back, and the bartender was a human woman with one arm replaced by a mining droid's rig claw. Kalen ordered something clear and unlabeled, then sat at a corner table facing the door. Old habits. The kind that kept you alive. It wasn't long before the chair across from him scraped back. Valessa sat down without a word. She looked different now, hair tied back, a blade visible on her thigh, a compact blaster on her hip that hadn't been polished in weeks. Survival gear. Edge of space gear. The kind that meant she hadn't gone back either. "I was wondering if you'd find me," he said. "I wasn't looking," she replied. "I just knew where you'd run." He offered a dry smile. "And where is that?" "Where nobody else can reach you." A pause. The storm outside rattled the walls. "I heard," she said finally, "that your code packet corrupted." He nodded. "So they say. But not all of it." "No," he admitted. "I kept a piece." Her eyes narrowed. "That wasn't the plan." "There was no plan," he said, sipping the drink, "just instructions." "And now?" "Now," he said, leaning forward, "I'm holding leverage, which means I finally have a choice." Valessa studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide what kind of man he'd become. "And what will you do with it?" "Nothing." She raised a brow. He continued, "For once, I'm going to hold the winning card and not play it, not sell it, not trade it, just keep it out of the game." She nodded slowly. "That's not survival. That's idealism." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's the last bluff." They sat in silence for a while. No mission, no lies. Just two ghosts of a war that hadn't ended yet, both too tired to keep pretending they weren't haunted. When she finally stood, she said, "The galaxy doesn't stop spinning because you stepped off the table." "I know. And one day, someone's going to offer you enough to make you care again." He looked up. "And if that day comes, maybe I'll still be holding the card." She gave a soft smile. "Try not to fold when it counts." Then she left. Kalen remained, watching the door until it stopped swinging. Outside, the storm cleared. The stars blinked back into view, and somewhere, in a deck that no longer obeyed rules, a single card remained unplayed. The game wasn't over. It just needed a new dealer.